Welcome to the You're Not Invisible After 50 podcast. I'm Kiran Kumar, founder and host of You're Not Invisible After 50. Despite the title, you don't have to be over 50 to listen to this podcast. No matter whether you're 25, 45, or 65, we can all learn lessons from each other to help us build a better, more fulfilled life. Come listen to the inspiring stories of all the phenomenal women over 50 who are kicking ass and making an impact. They are not invisible. I'm not invisible, and neither are you. So, no matter what society says, life doesn't end at 50. In fact, it's just beginning. Welcome to the You're Not Invisible After 50 podcast. I'm Kiran and host of this podcast. We're all about showcasing phenomenal women over 50 who are kicking ass and making an impact. You get to hear all their inspiring stories why you don't have to be invisible after 50. So sit back and enjoy the wonderful life story from this week's guest. My guest today is Consuelo Flores. Welcome.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm really glad you're here. And I'm really going to say, first of all, thank you for choosing to come onto the podcast. I'm so glad that we are going to do this together. So let's begin by getting you to introduce yourself to our listeners in one line or more before we move into the body of this podcast.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak, not only for myself, but also for women over 50 who are maybe a little insecure about what their future looks like or are a little nervous. And I just feel very strongly that women over 50 are not only uh, still very viable and vibrant, but actually more important because of their experiences and of what they have to offer in guiding other women through this journey called life, right? So I'm
Absolutely.
very, very excited to be part of this really important podcast.
Oh,
And
thank you very much. It means so much what you've just said. And I think you're absolutely right that we need to empower other women in terms of what their life could look like going forward. Absolutely.
absolutely, absolutely. So what you're doing is very important. So I would describe myself as a multimedia artist, writer, educator, and culture bearer. That's each one of those words that identify or define me have a great chapter behind them. And that's really a very concise way of putting my life's journey in one sentence.
Well, that sounds very empowering. Let's get into the body of this podcast. Can't wait. So in this podcast, we're going to cover your life story, the past, wherever you want to say, the present, of course, if there was a trigger point at 50, and what the future looks like. And then, of course, we go into the bonuses at the end. So let's begin in the past, wherever you want to start, and also whatever you want to say. So please.
So I'm going to start with my childhood. I was born into a family. I was the last of 10 children, and it was a very economically depressed neighborhood. 10 children. It was very difficult, very challenging for my parents to provide. My mother was a stay-home mother, and everyone, because we were so many, everyone was very competitive for her attention, for her love, for my father's love and attention. And we all kind of had to scramble to get a little piece of them. And so, what my mom would do, and she was very correct in saying this, that you needed to have an education to fall back on. She never had it.
Mm-hmm.
She was not allowed to, as a woman in Mexico, to have an education. So she made sure, especially the women in her family, her children, would have an education. And the more we excelled, the more attention we got.
Wow.
So I started, playing violin, started playing cello, then violin, and I felt like, oh, this is attention that I can get. But it was my passion to be in the arts, just to that really called to me.
Mhm.
It pulled at my heart. I wanted to be in the arts, but my mom and my dad would not have it. So I'm being the last of 10 children, looking at my siblings going into different areas, education, law. There was even dabbling into medicine. Um, it was just the more they succeeded, the more attention they got, the less I felt secure about following my passion.
Right.
So I went into um I went to school. I had children before I graduated, and I that was a very big disappointment because my siblings all went to graduated from UCLA, from Berkeley, from Stanford, from USC, all very high profile universities here in Los Angeles or in California. And I dropped out to have children, and I got married, and it was super disappointing, super disappointing. So as an adult, about in my 30s, I went back to school. I went back to school and I decided I would follow my passion. I went to Antioch University here in the States, in California, and I went into creative writing and liberal studies, and then I went right into my MFA program, and I had to reinvent myself many times. This is where I'm at now, presently, is my fourth reinvention.
I think for
And
most women is really is that you kind of have to um reinvent yourself so many times because of the experiences that you have, and also the where you get in life, right? Where you are in your life in terms of your age, etc.
well, and also what happens in your life. It could be divorce, it could be the you lose your job, it could be any number of things. You have children. It's another whole chapter that you have to sort of negotiate and adjust your own life expectations or goals to make what is, in your what you're living in the moment happen.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you're not prepared. Sometimes you have to just by the fly do what you need to do in order to get through it. And other times you're lucky enough to have some sort of fallback, some sort of preparation because you've done the work before. And sometimes you don't know that you've done the work,
Yeah,
but you have,
absolutely.
and then you fall into something which is really in line with who you are. And that's where I'm at right now. So going back, my family was super competitive, and so I didn't follow my passion. And I sort of then I got married and had children, and I came to a point in my life where, okay, um, this is the third or fourth time that I've no, the third time that I've reinvented myself, and I went into administrative work. I couldn't follow my own passion, but I could help others follow theirs. So I worked in the diversity, equity, inclusion departments of two labor unions here in the entertainment industry, actually three, starting with the Writers Guild of America West, where I was responsible for getting people in the door and
Mm-hmm.
mentoring them, providing a program that would teach them how to write screenplays, either television or film. And I have to say, I'm very proud of the work that I did because I see credits rolling for TV shows or films, and I recognize names, and I still keep in touch with many of the people, often women, and more specifically, women of color of
Mm-hmm.
all backgrounds. And it's just so gratifying to see that. Same thing when I went into uh, the labor unions of AFTRA, which is American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. and then SAG-AFTRA when the two unions merged. And those are performers, anyone who is in front of a camera or behind a mic. And again, when I see people who I helped, I would do educational programs. I would produce educational programs for all of these labor unions and teach people how to either write, even though I was vicariously living through them, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what I wanted to do. I've curated art shows. It's all in the arts, all in
Mm.
the arts, visual art shows where again I've lifted up. And one of my uh, goals, it's a philosophy that I live by, is to uplift women, even if women don't necessarily have that reciprocal feeling. It doesn't matter, because what's important is to uplift women, because the more women that are in higher profiles, the better for all of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So where does that take us in terms of like the present? Because you've been doing that kind of work. Are you still involved in that kind of work, or have you moved out of it?
So in 2020, when the pandemic hit, um, there were I was working at the time at SAG-AFTRA. The pandemic hit in March, and then I believe it was in May, there was the first round of layoffs because production stopped. Everything
Mhm.
stopped. So there was a first round of layoffs and people lost their jobs. And then in July, there was the second round of layoffs. And in October was the third and final round of layoffs. And in October of that year is when I got laid off. I
Okay.
wasn't expecting it, but I kind of was. It was kind of
Mhm.
a weird situation. But
So
yeah,
that must have been quite devastating because at the time, that time wasn't good for anyone. And then to get laid off as well at that time as well. So wasn't probably good for yourself and your self-esteem, right?
no, it wasn't. And that's the thing that you know, it's very interesting because you do start questioning who you are, what your identity is. Who am I? Am I my job? Am I my title? Am I
Mm.
the work that I did? Who am I? What is it that is really my essence?
Mhm.
And so I had to pivot. I had to. It wasn't a choice, but I went back to my passion, which was the arts. It's again, um, the initial job that I took was, and it's all contract work. It's all contract work.
Mhm.
The initial job that I took was um, an area that is important to me, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was the year of the George Floyd murder here in
Right.
the United States. So this particular initiative was elevated, was created to find equity, especially for Black voices,
Mhm.
because the idea was that if you raise the Black voice and the Black profile, and you really do everything in the politicians' power, in the advocacy power, in the community power, you elevate and strengthen the Black voice, which is the most oppressed, which is the most persecuted in this country.
Yeah, we see it
And
from over here as well. Yeah, it's really
so
obvious.
it's so obvious, but if you elevate that community,
Mm.
then everything else will be elevated along with it. It's sort of the same principle that if you elevate the women, then you're going to have stronger families, you're going to have stronger communities. Um,
Absolutely. It's really important and necessary work, right? And
Absolutely. It's not easy.
mhm,
It's very challenging because there is so much unspoken racism that it is very challenging to kind of drill it down and get it
mhm.
out. But so that was a very important initiative. It can be done. It was a very important initiative. And by virtue of elevating the Black community here, we also chose in that particular initiative, it was an arts initiative. We also chose to identify other people of color within the greater Los Angeles County area, which is in its span. You can't go really by mileage here. You have to
Mm-hmm.
go by time. It's about 4 hours from one side of the county to the other.
Wow.
It's really a huge expanse. It's a huge
Mm-hmm.
expanse. So I would travel. I'm right in the center. I would travel 2 hours east or 2 hours north or half a, it would be so I could identify
Mm-hmm.
people of color, communities of color, and bring artists in to tell their own stories. And that was through the arts. And then we would have a celebration at the end where the artists would be able to talk about their work and engage with the community, which was really important. Um,
And what Okay, so there's two questions I have, which I'm really, dying to ask.
sure.
One is in terms of what was it? Was it storytelling or was it more than storytelling? And what did the various communities get out of it? What did they gain? What did it lead them with, really? What were the takeaways for them?
So it was storytelling not only through the visual art, but also through the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
It was talking about their own personal experiences and how their life's trajectory. And these were people of all ages, mostly young, because one of the most important aspects of that initiative was the mental health
Mm.
aspect of the double whammy, which is the overt racism that took the life of a Black man the the zillionth time.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the idea that we were all isolating because of the pandemic. And so
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of mental health issues that arose from that specific episode in all of our lives. And so how do we express ourselves? How do we find community when we're isolating? And that was really important. That happened in July, from July of 2021 through January of 2022. It was still in flux. The pandemic
Mm-hmm.
was still in flux, but we had sort of a light at the end of the tunnel because there were vaccinations, we were now able to go out a little bit more. We weren't isolating, but that readjustment was really kind of iffy. And so
Yeah.
this gave everyone an opportunity to express what it was that they had felt and be supported in a community. And we
That
were
is
able,
so crucial. It's not just important for the Black community and the minority community. It was so important for
for
everyone,
everyone.
really. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And that was really um, the opening that each of these communities had to really delve into how they felt, what happened to them personally. A lot of people during that time were not able to even go to a funeral.
Mm.
And when they lost people, it was a virtual funeral, which was very awkward, or there was no opportunity for closure. So a lot of the stories had to do with closure, had to do with expressing grief, had to do with expressing not only the isolation and the grief, but those two compounded. So it was really crucial, and that was one of the most important jobs that I had. And so I helped to facilitate those conversations.
I think from what you're saying, wasn't even a job. It was a need. It was a requirement. It was something that had to be done because there were so many people who were isolated at that time. But to have all of that as well at that time, what it does to humans and to people,
Absolutely.
we're here to support other people, and that was a necessary piece of work, necessary. an important piece of work?
It was very gratifying to
Yeah.
me, and it was very fulfilling for the communities. They felt heard, they felt seen, and I felt super connected with all all of the people that I interacted with.
Yeah, I mean, your that work and all the work that we're doing, there's a purpose behind it. There's a purpose behind it, and also passion behind it. And when you have the two combined, that's quite something, isn't it? It's quite it's huge. It's monumental, really, because when you have all of that, you know that what you're doing is going to be only for the better, the improvement of mankind or humankind. Yeah.
One of the saying there are two sayings that I have taken away from my union work, my labor union work. One is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm.
So not one individual voice it should overshadow or overpower the whole. And that's really important when it comes to things like the project that I worked with. It was everyone could identify with the voice, and we all supported that voice.
Mm-hmm.
And it became part of the group, part of the whole. And then the other one is that the perfect cannot get in the way of the good. Is something perfect? No. Is it good? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there room for improvement? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
So
Fantastic.
those are the two things that I really come away with when I do my work, is that it's not one individual that should dictate, or it's not an authoritarian project. It's a holistic approach to whatever it is that we're doing.
I think that's the case for everyone, really. You know, even on this podcast, even though I may be the initiator, but everybody plays an important part of it. It's the cumulative voices that actually make the difference, that make, you know, this is what we're talking about, is changing the narrative. But it's not one single person's voice, it's a voice of many. And that's
Exactly.
absolutely, and that's where you get a movement, a push, a change, a transformation, all of
You
that.
right. It's the butterfly effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. So, what else are you doing at the moment? What else is going on?
So, I mentioned to you earlier that you sometimes have built a foundation that you didn't really know was there until suddenly it's there and you're working on it. You're
Mm-hmm.
working on, you're using that foundation to launch yourself. And that is where I am now. I have been one of my passions has been Day of the Dead work. I'm known for the work that I've done in this area. Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, is a time that is specifically set aside in Mexico on November 1st and November 2nd to honor and memorialize the people who have passed, the gifts that they have given us in from their life experiences. And it's not like, oh, here's a coffee cup, Consuelo, this is a gift that I'm giving you. No, it's let me teach you how to read and write in Spanish. That was my father's gift to me. Let me teach you how to cook really, amazing Mexican dishes. That was my mother's gift. My mother's gift was also how to keep your family together, how to strengthen your family. And then my brother who died, was his gift to me was the social justice. You've got to work for community, not just for yourself. And
I
so
love that.
those gifts were given to me. So whenever Days of the Dead happen, I have been working on the Day of the Dead as a participant first, and then as an actual culture bearer for the celebration since 1981.
Wow.
In a long time. And now, based on all that I've done, all the work that I've done, there's this enormous foundation. So I've curated several Day of the Dead shows. I'm doing that again this year for the biggest park in west of the Mississippi in Los Angeles, which is Gloria Molina Grand Park, where I curated last year all of the altar installations. I'm doing it again this year. I'm also teaching. I'm teaching, and at the university level, I created a syllabus for that, and it's an academic course on the Day of the Dead, the history and tradition, and how to build altars, what the significance is of these altars, why they're important, and also just it entails to build an altar, to understand exactly what that means. It's not just, oh, let me put these things together and that's it.
Hmm.
And the difference, for example, between Halloween and Day of the Dead, the fact that it is not satanic at all, it has nothing to do with religion, really. It has everything to do with um, honoring your dead.
I just love
And
the part when you said about what gift your mother had given you, what gift your father had given you, what gift, your brother who died gave you. And I think that is so respectful. That is so honorable. It's just something that we should be doing. And we don't think about it. A lot of us don't think about it. I know that I set up my company because of my mom, because of what she gave me. But to do that each and every year, it's just so gratifying in terms of respecting those who came before us, really.
absolutely. And what I do is I have a perpetual altar in my home where I see my brother, I see my parents, I see them, and it's a reminder. I may not go to the altar that I've created at home and stand before it every day, but I acknowledge it every day because I see it every day.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's a reminder of who I am because of who they were. And
Oh, love that. Just love that.
the altar building is very important to me. I'm curating, you asked us, what am I doing? I'm curating the Day of the Dead altars at Grand Park again. I'm teaching again for this. I'm already starting. And so we're what, in June? I've
Hmm.
already started
Hmm.
working on that. I signed the contract. I'm working on the dates. I'm working on who it is that I'm going to include, who I'm going to reach out to in terms of community partners, because again, um, community partnership is really important. We want to uplift an entire community, not just individual voices.
Oh, just powerful, just crucial work, and so honorable in terms of respecting those who have gone before us, those who we've known or have don't know at all, right? Everybody needs to
Exactly.
be respected in life and in death as well. Absolutely.
Right. And one of the other altars that I did that was super important to me, speaking of the pandemic, in reference to the pandemic, was in this country, and I don't know how it was everywhere else in the world, but in this country, the two primary communities that were most affected were Latinos and Blacks. And
Hmm.
so they were essential workers. They often lived in multi-generational families. They often were so economically depressed that they couldn't afford to miss work. They didn't have health insurance often, and so they wouldn't go to the doctor until it was too late. And so whole families died when one person got sick and they lived in a multi-generational family, whole families died.
That's so
And so
sad, and so unnecessary.
it was. And so for me, that was there, but for the grace of God, go I so much
Hmm.
because I have my daughter-in-law is Black, my grandchildren are Black.
Hmm.
And so it was very, very um it hit me hard to see people that look like me or look like my family
Hmm.
die because of whatever.
Yeah, I can
Ignorance
understand
is
that.
ignorance is a big factor there. So
Yeah.
it was that's those are my I really want to uplift again and recognize the impact of whatever ills are falling on our society, and make sure that we shine a light on that so that it doesn't happen again. but it continues to happen. I was asked a couple of years ago what altar I was going to be making the following Day of the Dead season. And I said, I can tell you what I don't want to make. I don't want to make an altar for any mass shooting victims or any epidemic victims. I don't want another thing to befall our community that can be avoidable, but it keeps happening.
But what I find is that if nobody makes a difference, or nobody starts to make a difference, nothing will ever get changed, right? Somebody
Exactly.
has to make that difference. Somebody has to do
Exactly.
the work, and then hopefully it'll have an impact. It'll be a ripple effect. It'll make it, it'll grow in numbers, and people who learn from the good that people are trying to do and not the negative things that are happening around the world.
And I try so hard to do that. It's not easy, but
Yeah,
I make that effort. And oftentimes I succeed. And I try to focus on those, even though it doesn't always completely work. The perfect cannot get in the way of the good. And I keep
absolutely.
reminding myself that.
Yeah, just do the good. Just do the good.
Yes.
Absolutely. So what does the future look like then? What are you seeing in the future in terms of what you're doing?
So I continue to mentor other people, teach, offer the tools that guided me and offer them up. If they help, great. And if they don't, that's fine too. But I offer them. The future is always about looking at how the tools that have I've implemented in my own life can be offered to others. I also do what is called literary altars, which is basically memoir honoring my the people who've contributed to my life. The more personal you are, the more specific you are, the more universal that story becomes.
Mm.
So I tripped and fell is very specific. Everyone can identify with that. um, you know, there was a hurricane and it hit a whole town. You can't really, you can't always wrap your brain around the massive. So
Yeah,
it's too big. It's too
yeah,
big.
yeah.
It's so you have to
Make it
be
more personal.
more
Absolutely.
personal. And what you're doing with this podcast is making each story very personal. And that's super important because women will identify with some part of that story and they will be able to feel confident in what they're feeling because someone else has felt the same thing or experienced.
Absolutely. Absolutely spot on. And that actually brings us very nicely to, was there a trigger point at 50? Because that's what this is about. Was there a trigger point that made you feel that you've got to do things differently? Did you feel that?
Well, I don't know if it happened at 50, but I
Mm-hmm.
know it happened in my older age. And that
Mm-hmm.
was when I looked at my own children. I have boys. I have two
Right.
sons. And I looked at my own children and I it was important for me that they follow their dreams, that they be okay with who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really important to me. If I wasn't okay with who I was, then what am I showing them?
Totally agree with that, because you can't be, I always say you can't, I'm a single mom now. I've been a single mom for a long, long time, but I don't want to be a weak mom, because at the end of the day I have two grown-up children, and if I show up as somebody who's weak and can't control my own life, what what lesson am I teaching them in
Well,
terms of managing themselves in the future, right?
that's exactly right. And and I also didn't want them to choose women in their lives that were weak either. They
Mm-hmm.
had to choose women. I remember when they were very little, starting to tell them when that I noticed that they're looking at girls, don't go for the pretty, Go for the smart first, then the nice, and then the pretty. And pretty, by the way, you define how that is. Because what is pretty to you is different than for him. So do not, you feel confident in that, but that the people in your life must be smart, must be nice, and must be, then you are attracted to them. And that can look in, and smart is defined also. What is smart? Smart can be book smart, it could be life
Street
smart,
smart.
street smart, it could be any kind of smart, but what that calls to you is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, makes sense. So let's move on to the bonus part. Oh, is there anything else you want to say before we move on to the bonus part?
No,
No?
we can move on to the bonus part, unless you want me to say something else, and then you have to ask me a question.
Oh, well, I'll ask it. Well, I would want to go right back to the beginning, but I mean, let's just go back to the beginning because this is slightly different. But I'm intrigued. You said that, in order for you to get attention of your parents, you had to do well. Because you got married and had children, how was your relationship with your parents after that?
Oh, it was very difficult. It was super difficult. They were so angry with me. But the interesting thing is that they were very angry with me. But I mentioned that my brother died. Well, my brother committed suicide.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And it was because he didn't want to fail my parents.
Wow.
And well, I mean, that was part of it. That was part of it. There were other very real parts of his suicide that but what is relevant here is that my parents never got over losing their son. They, especially in that way. And that became a switch for both of my parents, because I followed my, for lack of a better term, my unconventional life path, despite what they wanted. And I had to be strong by doing that, right? And my parents kind of thought, especially my mom, I spent a lot of time with my mom after that, and she regretted not supporting him in the way he wanted, the way he needed. And so she switched the way she viewed me.
Wow, that is super, super powerful. And I'm so glad that your story ended that way, that relationship ended on a very positive note. And I'm glad I asked the question because I was intrigued, but I'm glad I asked the question. And thank you for that. Let's move on to the bonus part of the podcast. I
Okay,
mean,
I'm
I
ready.
could actually talk to you for ages now that we've got into all of this, but that isn't going to be actually feasible. So let's move on, reluctantly, I must say, to the bonus part of the podcast. The 5 tips that you would give to someone who's under 50.
So I'm going to read them because I wrote
Okay.
them down. Listen to your voice and be true to yourself. Do not be afraid to take steps in directions that are maybe not quite formed yet. Um, Find your voice first. Find that voice that tickles you. It'll tickle you and it'll tell you, here I am, find it. And then one of the things that helped me was to be financially independent. However that looks, you can have a survival job and still follow your passion, but be financially independent. And then the last thing is always mentor women. One of the things that I grew up with was the idea that when a woman is educated, a family is educated, a community is educated.
Absolutely.
If women are given the platforms to launch themselves, they take the community with them.
That's
And
true.
that's really important. So always try to find women that that you can mentor, that are seeking that mentorship. Not everyone is, but you can always offer advice here and there. I have mentored so many women, and it's been really gratifying to see them succeed.
Absolutely. I think nobody takes away your power, but if somebody else is empowered, it's a gift, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And you never know. You don't do it with the intention of what am I going to get out of this? You don't do it that. But when that does happen, when somebody offers you a gift and later on, or an acknowledgement or something, it's just really wonderful. It's such a gift, such a wonderful experience.
Can I just say it? That's that point in what you've just said is that you've given me that already. I mean, you've given me that in terms of being here. You've given me that in terms of the connections, the names that you've given me for going forward. I mean, that is a gift. That's, I'm honored by that. I'm humbled by that. I can't thank you enough, to be honest.
Well, it's been a true pleasure. I believe in, and as I said, uplifting the community by uplifting women.
Absolutely. 3 tips to anybody who's over 50. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say to them, it's never too late to pivot and follow your passion. It's
Mm-hmm.
never too late. It could happen. When I knew a woman who went back to school and she was in her 80s
Good for
to
her, I'd say.
get her degree because she wanted that degree.
Mm.
And always okay to go and pivot. And then think of yourself as the woman you've mentored in the past, and give yourself that same love, attention, and support. You can't, you have to fill your own cup before you
Yes.
can give it to others. But I always tell, and like my children or uh, other people that are adults, think of yourself when you were little, that 5-year-old little boy, that 5-year-old little girl. And that person, that 5-year-old still lives in yourself. So treat yourself as you would that like being protective, being supportive, being loving, being, a guide. Do that for yourself because it's super important to nurture yourself. And so that's another.
That is
And
super important. You're right. Because I think at the end of the day, if you don't look after yourself and you don't take care of yourself and you don't love yourself, how can you even love anybody else or take care of them?
exactly. And so fill your cup first.
Mm.
Then the third one would be, you have established relationships in your life. Don't be afraid to ask for help or guidance or support from the relationships that you have cultivated. People want to help. That's an
Mm.
innate part of human nature. People want to help, most people. And so don't be afraid to ask for that help. It's you mentioned Patrika earlier. She's a good friend. She can't do certain things on her own. She asks for help.
Mm.
We go and help. My husband and I will go and help. Or um, my son has needs to for babysit. He asks for help.
Mm.
You can ask for help too. Don't be afraid to ask for help, to ask for direction, to ask for, hey, do you have any leads? This is what I'm doing now. Ask for that help. Everyone is a network, that,
Absolutely.
and everyone, I call it like a web that shrinks and expands depending on where you are in life.
I find that now through the work that I'm doing, I find that my network has grown, and it is like a web. It's exactly like a web. It's got all those complexities of a web, um, and it's just beautiful to as it's formed. It's and forming, it's growing, and I just think it's just wonderful to watch.
So yeah, that it's a very important thing to acknowledge that each little thread of that web depends on the other. And
Yes,
so you can be one of those threads that people can depend on, but then you can depend on those other threads too.
love that, love that. Can I just say it has been a wonderful podcast. It's been just so I'm lost for words actually, because I'm so enthralled by your story, the work that you're doing, and the wisdom that you have. And I'm so honored that you actually came on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you.
No, sincerely mean it, right? I wouldn't be saying it otherwise. But it's just been an honor. And I think for all the women who come on my podcast, I mean, it's just such a delight because you learn so much, you gain so much, you give so much. Well, I hope I give a little bit. But you certainly gain a lot. And I just
You
think
have.
it's so beautiful to have you and all the other women that I've had on the podcast and all the women that I'm going to feature.
I think what you're doing, providing this platform and facilitating the conversation, is a gift to everyone, not just the women on it, but the women who, not just the women, everyone who hears it, because we all have to acknowledge what women over 50 can do and why we are so important.
Absolutely. Wise words. And I think I'm going to finish there with that. I'm not going to add anything else. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the You're Not Invisible After 50 podcast. If you want to hear more from some amazing women who are over 50, who are kicking ass and making impact, then don't forget to follow us right here on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Remember to subscribe, rate, comment, and share with other women through your social media. Let's spread the word across the world that you don't have to be invisible after 50. Check out our other services on www.you'renotinvisibleafter50.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube. And always remember that life doesn't end at 50. In fact, it's just beginning. But wait, we have even more to offer. Join us and tune in to our other podcast, Shamelessly Untamed, a transformative series that encourages you to embrace your true self and celebrate your uniqueness. Make sure to subscribe to Shamelessly Untamed podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Don't forget to rate, comment, and share with anyone who can benefit from its content. Explore our additional services at www.roaringahead.com and be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube. We look forward to you connecting with us. Thank you.